Hello everyone. Today we'll be bringing you a review of the Pilot Dr. Grip Limited Retractable Rollerball Pen of fine point 0.7 millimeters. Pilot claims this pen relieves writing stress and fatigue and reduces required gripping power. This is achieved by an ergonomic cushion grip. This pen uses the same ink as the G2 pen, which utilizes Pilot's unique gel ink formula. Pilot advertises this gel ink as being the longest lasting gel ink, twice as long as other gel brands to be specific. It's also touted as providing smooth writing and being smear proof. While I have found other pens with G2 ink to be somewhat smooth, we have had major issues with smearing in the past, so I do expect more of the same from this Dr. Grip. I should mention that only the limited version of the Dr. Grip uses the G2 ink. There's also a standard Dr. Grip pen, which is identical, except the limited is a rollerball gel pen, and the original is a standard ballpoint, not the gel ink. There's also a Dr. Grip mechanical pencil, so you can essentially get this comfortable shell in 3 different writing instruments. This pen features custom painted metallic barrels in designer colors, and they are ice blue, which we have here, platinum, charcoal gray, and champagne mauve. It's commended for ease of use by the Arthritis Foundation, and this is evident by the seal found right on the front of the package. Pen is retractable. Spring feels good, and the entire mechanism feels very solid. Refill comes out the front here, so watch out for the spring. And again, this is Pilot's G2 refill. The ink supply is not visible when the refill is in the pen. So, without further ado, let's see how it writes. The comfort of this pen is evident right away. The grip is extremely comfortable, and I felt no strain whatsoever in my hand. Writing with this pen for any length of time really is a breeze. It feels reasonably smooth as you write. Not the smoothest by any means, but it definitely performs well in this category. The pen produces very crisp, dark lines. They look very good on the paper and really stand out. There was essentially no skipping whatsoever. We did have a bit of an issue with blobbing though. While it wasn't happening constantly, we did get some sporadic blobbing here and there. Also, the instances of blobbing that we did see were pretty heavy. There would be a lot of ink left on the paper that would just really pool up. So you can see kind of right around these curves here, we got some heavy spots of blobbing. Occasionally, like at the top of the E, we got some blobbing too. So while it didn't happen all the time, when it did happen, it was, it was a pretty heavy amount. Let's see how it performs in a smear test. One second. Two seconds. 3, 4, and 5. So as you can see, the smear test results were a little bit inconsistent. 1 and 2 seconds seemed to actually be the best results, whereas 3 and 4 were the worst, and then 5 got a little bit better. Now again, the reason being, this comes to the kind of inconsistent and sporadic blobbing of the ink. We really didn't get any blobbing for the first 2 seconds that we tried the smear test, so smearing was actually, it was there, but it was somewhat minimal. 3 and 4 seconds we did get a little bit of blobbing. 5 there was a very tiny amount, so we actually did get a little bit more smearing later on as opposed to earlier in the smear test. So it's very dependent on how much ink kind of comes out, and that's where the the inconsistencies in the lines it produces and the amount of blobbing that happens will really lead to a lot of inconsistencies in how long it's going to take to dry and how much smearing you're going to get. Bleed through, we found it to be present but minimal. Again, with the blobbing, it all comes right back to that. The only places we really saw any bleed through directly to the other side were the spots where too much ink came out and it really blobbed up. So here, here, and there, which are these areas right around the curve here, which were the worst instances of it. And then a few sporadic spots here and there, very minor in some areas, right there a little bit, right here a little. So it's not frequent. It's definitely sporadic, somewhat rare, but when it does happen, it tends to happen somewhat heavily. So let's see how it did in some writing we did prior. We noticed a lot of the same. Very crisp, dark lines produced. Felt very smooth as we wrote with it. Again, not the smoothest, but it did above average in that category. The bleed through. Again, present, but somewhat infrequent. And the most noticeable spots being, once again, where we had those issues with blobbing. A lot of times if it's you're writing a longer line and kind of writing around a curve, things like that, that's where we're going to see that blobbing and therefore that bleed through happening. The smear test, again, performed reasonably well, which was better than I expected. Essentially, you get the amount of smearing. The amount of smearing you're going to get is dependent on the amount of blobbing. So if you don't get any of those blobs of ink, smearing will be present, but very minimal. If you do get a large blob of ink, smearing will be heavy. As you can see, I got no blobbing really when I did the smear test, so the results were pretty good. 1 to 3 seconds was a fair amount of smearing. 4 to 5 seconds, it was very minimal. Since it was still smearing at 5 seconds, and since we kind of had those inconsistencies with the blobbing, we went ahead and did a little bit more extended smear test. So, as you can see there, we got, again, pretty inconsistent results with the smear test. So by 10 seconds, there was no blobbing. The ink was completely dry. So under normal circumstances, the ink takes in the 5 to 10 second range to dry completely. As you can see, I got a spot of heavy blobbing at 30 seconds, so accordingly there was also heavy smearing. And even after 60 seconds, a large blob of ink was still very wet and susceptible to smearing, so those areas need a tremendous amount of time to dry, easily several minutes. From the smear test alone, I prefer the G2 ink in the 0.7 as opposed to the 0.1 millimeters. For ink that has this many issues drying, a 1.0 millimeter point is just way too big and led to way too much smearing. At least with the 0.7 millimeter point, while we still have a chance of getting heavy smearing, it's much less frequent than with the 1.0, and the majority of the time the ink is dry in that 5 to 10 second window. The only disadvantage we seem to have experienced with this smaller point is that when we did get those blobs, they were enormous and had longer dry times than when we did a test of the 1 millimeter G2. So it was less blobbing overall, but the individual instances of blobbing tended to be worse. So, overall, this is a good pen to use, particularly if comfort is a key factor to you. It's reasonably smooth to write with and produces crisp, dark lines. Its biggest disadvantage, however, is the occasional blobbing ink, which leads to some smearing and some bleed through. So, that's about it. Thanks for watching.